Hey, welcome to Being Creative. My name is Rick Leaf, and as you know, I'm the host of this show where we explore the value of creativity through stories of successes and failures of individuals like us or not like us at all. Now, I've talked a big game about, being creative and sharing failures, but I'm going to have to actually walk the talk here today. So I am going to share one of my biggest failures in my career. It is going to involve one of the biggest confessions of one of the most embarrassing parts of my story. I hate to talk about it, but I'm going to lay it all out for you. So don't go anywhere. I'm glad you're here. All right. Well, I produce this podcast because I want to explore stories of success. Yeah, of course. But I also want to explore failures in equal measure because successes are great and that's what we all hope for. But while we can be inspired by the accomplishments and successes of others, I know that we can all relate to failures and struggles, which is why I think it's too bad that we're not more comfortable in sharing those parts. And I say all of that to build myself up. I'm trying to give myself the courage here to press on with sharing one of my biggest career failures ever, why it got there. But to share that, I need to share one of the biggest kind of embarrassing parts of my history so that any of it will make sense. So jumping straight in here, okay? So I used to live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and it's known for being the super creative city, which it is, and that's where I started my group, Tribe of One. That's where almost every album I've ever been part of happened. Everything. My TV show that I produced happened there, based myself out of there for decades. But right before I moved to Winnipeg, I was raised here. I'm going to dive straight into the embarrassing part, okay? Here's my confession. So I was raised in a super religious environment. One of the most religious Canadian prairie towns. There was this massive Bible college in the town that my parents had gone to. My grandfather taught at it. I mean, it was a super religious little town. My family, very religious. My grandparents had been part of starting this church that we all went to. So all my cousins and aunties and uncles, everybody went to this church. All super, okay, whatever. A lot of people have a story like that. For me, it was, the fact that as a young adult, I continued on in that pursuit. And so I had moved to Kelowna. I'd become part of this church community as a young adult, and I was, becoming a songwriter, and I got involved in it. It was a kind of a rock and roll thing called God Rock, and it was this like every week, getting into this downtown venue. And, 300-400 people would show up and we would just play for 3-4 hours. And just musically speaking, it was a fantastic environment to learn how to perform, to learn how to play with other artists, other musicians, to learn songwriting structure and arrangements and everything else. And, but whether I ever intended that to be a career, it just, like some of these things happen, it just sort of happened. You start playing for 300-400 people, and then somebody comes from out of town, and then there were these conferences, like youth conferences. There'd be thousands of people coming from all over Western Canada, Western states, and you start playing at these events, and one thing leads to another. Somebody's from Seattle, and they're at this event that's happening in Vancouver, and they're just like, hey, I really liked your band. Why don't you come down to Seattle and play my conference? And the next thing you know, I have a church-related career. And I say that like jokingly, laughingly, because if you know me at all, you would know what an uncomfortable environment that would be for me personally, for my lifestyle, for the language that I use, for just the type of person I am. It was very uncomfortable. Bedfellow, or whatever the expression would be. It wasn't really like, lots of people just love church. They love everything about it. And it didn't really work for me. But I was making money, and we were selling thousands of CDs, and it was just a legit sort of, I look back on it now and I'm just like, wow, like it, we're going to get into it. But I was just like, well, it was so easy. Everything was so easy. People knew me. They were buying my music. They liked my music. Other people, they started recording some of my songs. It was all really fun and successful. Anyways, I moved to Winnipeg, and for a period of time kept kind of doing the same thing, just now based out of Winnipeg. And there came this one point where, we're playing for 7,000, 5,000 people. I remember playing for on a show down in Toronto called Free TV, and it was like live, nationally broadcast show, all on religious networks. But it was just exploding, going that way. And anyways, at the same time, we're living in Winnipeg. We're just trying to be a working band, playing pubs and clubs and bars, and getting on stage at 2 a.m. and tearing down, and it's minus 30 degrees as you're packing your gear out in the backyard or back alley and taking it back home, and you stink like smoke and everything else, and you're trying to get up in the morning because you got little kids, and just we're just trying to be a working band. Anyway, I was setting up a tour this one year, and he was the head. His name was Andrew. He's a friend of mine. He was the head of the little record company that we were part of, and he was also a musician and touring. And I phoned him up. I said, "Look, I'm going to set up an Eastern Canada tour. Would you want to do it with me?" And he said, "No, I don't want to do conferences anymore." He was feeling, I think, much the same as I was. And he said, "No, I don't want to." But he's like, "You know what? I was reading an article in the Globe and Mail the other night, and the guy was the arts and entertainment writer. He was supposed to be covering the Grammys. And he said, I don't want to talk about the Grammys. I want to talk about this house concert." Now, we're talking about, back in around 1999, 2000, somewhere in that area. And so this guy said, I want to talk about, this writer said, I want to talk about this house concert I went to. It was super cool. There's like 30, 40 people in this house. We're just sitting around, super informal. This artist was just right there, acoustic guitar, telling stories about how they wrote the song and what the song was about. We were able to ask questions. It was super intimate and interactive. I loved it. That's what I wanted to do. So my friend Andrew said, I don't want to do conferences anymore. I want to do house concerts. And house concerts now, in 2022 or whatever, notwithstanding the last 2 years of COVID, not being able to get together, but, lots of people, there's house concert circuits, and but 22 years ago, there wasn't that many people. So I remember sending out these emails to the conference organizers who only knew Rick Leaf as the guy doing these conferences for thousands of people with a big band and whatever. And I'm saying, hi, myself and Andrew, we want to come and do a house concert. And they're like, you want to do what? I'm like, yeah, just the two of us, acoustic guitars. We just and they're like, you want to play in a house? I'm like, yes, ideally. I want to play in a house, and I want you to feed us, put us up. I also want you to put us up, and I want you to feed us supper and breakfast in the morning. And, whatever it was, $500 a night. I want you to pay me $500 to come play in your living room. And I'm hoping, it used to work out. I was selling my partner's artwork along with CDs. So I'm always hoping, maybe I'm going to make about $250 worth of sales. So it's going to be a $750 night for me. And there's not going to be any accommodation costs. There's not going to be any meal costs because they're covering all of that. So if I rent a car and get my plane ticket, I could probably. So what I ended up doing was, we started doing house concerts. I started doing house concerts, and it would be you could kind of guarantee on $750 a night. I would set up, because Canada's so big, I wouldn't want to drive anywhere. I would want to like set the tour up so that I could fly in on a Friday, play every night that weekend, play all, every night the next week in that region and the next weekend, and then come home. So you'd, put together 10 nights of a tour. You'd be playing virtually every night that you were gone, grossing about $750 a night. So 7,000, some $7,500, let's say roughly, with a plane ticket and a car rental as almost my only expenses. And I was living in Winnipeg, where cost of living was super cheap. Our house was so cheap. Our rent, we were able to live as artists just starting out, not comfortably and certainly not rolling in money, but we were able to do this. But here's where the failure, it was my perception on my audience and my career. And here I am in Winnipeg, and I'm day to day, I'm hanging out with other artists like me, singer-songwriters and bands and everybody, and we're just playing all these cool pubs and clubs, and we're just like being part of the cultural community. And then I would leave, I would jet out of the city, and I would go play for church people, because that's who knew me. Not in churches anymore, but in their homes. But still, a conservative crowd, church crowd, religious crowd, the themes they would still want to hear would be related to all of that. And so I convinced myself that either this wasn't authentic or it was somehow lesser than what every other artist like me in Winnipeg and in Canada was doing. So I convinced myself I needed to abandon the career I had for the career I thought I needed. So what do? I'm part of a great music association, probably one of the best in the country, at least it was at the time. So I go to the head of the music association that I'm part of, the Provincial Music Association. I talk to the president, and I'm like, look, I just basically gave him a condensed version of what I just told you. And I'm like, what should I do to advance my career? How do I do it? And he gave me this advice. And he said, okay, well, pick an artist in Canada that you think is at your level or a little bit ahead of you. Go to their website, find out where they're touring, look at all of the venues that they're booked at for their tours. You know that if your music is a little bit like their music, that venue is probably going to be the right kind of a place for you to be playing at. If they're booking the person who's at your level or just a little bit above you, then you're in the ballpark. You should be able to negotiate to go do that. And yeah, so do that. And that's how you're going to take a great step. And I remember walking out of there, and I don't know what that advice sounds like to you listening. I remember thinking, wow, that's really great. That makes a lot of sense. So there was a band out of Winnipeg called the Waylon Jennies that had just broken up, but they were like a Juno Award-winning trio, really good songwriters and beautiful music. And they'd, I think, split up, or no, maybe they hadn't split up. Cara Luft was one of the founders, I believe, and she had left the band at that time, maybe a year before. And so I thought, okay, Cara Luft, she's part of the Waylon Jennies, ahead of me kind of in notoriety and whatever, but definitely I felt like we were in the same ballpark. So I went to her website, I looked at her tour, and it was an East Coast tour. And I saw all of these places where she had played. And so I made the list, and I got online, and I found out all of their contact information. I contacted all of them. And as best I could, I set up a tour in the Maritime region of Canada, the East Coast of Canada. I set up the worst tour I have ever set up in my life. I've never lost money on a tour ever. I've never actually got money from any art organization, any grant organization. I've never had corporate sponsorship or anything like that. I've always made money by just being just hustling, not even being very good at business. But that tour, if I made $50, if I made $100 after paying everything, that would be it. It was the worst tour, and here's why. I'm not Cara Luft. Like, for all I know, the Waylon Jennings played the East Coast tour once or twice a year for 5 years. Literally, like, I don't know anything about the story. But if this idea that because it worked for somebody else, it will work for you, it's like it just, nobody knew me in these venues, except in these towns and communities, whatever. So, of course, nobody's coming out. I remember this one night in St. John, New Brunswick. I actually had a great connection. I played at a church for hundreds of people, had sold, tons of music, made tons of money. They were one of the groups that had transitioned to hosting house concerts. I could always guarantee on 40 or 50, 60 people packing out a house, selling tons of money, being fed great great food and put up in a great room. And we were drinking great scotch after the show was over. I mean, everything about it was perfect. And I had abandoned all of that to go play at this coffee shop. And it was probably winter. And it was a pretty miserable, stormy night. So I drive, here I've flown from Winnipeg to Toronto, from Toronto to Halifax. I've got the car. I mean, it's taken me however much, how many days and away from my family and all the time to get out there and all of the expense. And I'm showing up in this crappy weather with my guitar, with my stuff to come do the best show possible. And literally the front door wasn't even closed behind me yet. And the manager looked over, the owner looked over and said, "If nobody shows up tonight, we're closing early." I was like, not even a hello. Not even a, "Hey, Rick, you've traveled thousands of kilometers. Welcome to whatever the stupid coffee shop's name is." No, man. They couldn't give a crap about me or what it had taken to get there. And I was like looking around for the posters that I had sent. None of them were up. They didn't lift a finger to help me promote a show in their own venue. Where, as opposed to, say that church crowd that would have done that, they would have taken care of anything. All they would have to have done probably is on Sunday morning said, "Hey, by the way, Rick Leaf's coming to town. He's doing a house concert on Friday nights, $20 each, limit of 50 people, cram into the house." I abandoned a great thing for an absolute trash thing. And every night of that tour was basically like that. Now, why? That is so important. And I look back and I will never forget that. I took the advice of the president of one of the best music associations in the country. Now, was that bad advice? For me, yes. It was the worst. That doesn't mean that for somebody else, that advice wouldn't work great. But that's the idea, that there is no formula in a creative life that works the same for everybody else. I just 2 days ago watched another short webinar, pre-recorded webinar from the guy that does Samcart, this online store. And he's got this one-page sales page funnel, whatever, that he's trying to sell you. And I don't know why I watched it. It just something about the ad intrigued me, and I watched it and it was just like, yeah, it's the same thing though. It's like, this worked for me. This worked for these other three guys. I've had hundreds or thousands of people go through it. And he tells me the story, he shows 3 people. And that's but this idea of online coaching and consulting, it so often comes down to, hey, this is what I did, and this is the results I got, so you do this, and, well, I can't promise that you're going to get the same results, but I'm going to infer that you will. And it doesn't work like that. A creative career, a creative life doesn't work that way. It's not about a formula. You know what? In a creative life, the way I look at it, it's things add up differently. I know that you math geniuses out there, you understand these formulas. I understand how, well, in theory, I understand why people would like math. I love that somebody would say, what are the components? How do I put them together? And how do I definitively and absolutely know that I have the correct answer? I understand why that would appeal to some people's minds. It's not my mind. It's not the way I look at the world. And it's not actually the result I'm looking for. I'm looking for, how does my creative capital, my talents and gifts and abilities and experience and education, how does it apply to this situation right now? And not only will I not approach problem solving in this situation differently than you, I will probably approach this situation differently than I did a year ago, or 5 years ago, or 20 years ago. I remember touring with Andrew, actually. At one point, he said something about, we were just talking about life back home and our partners, whatever. And he said, I'm so lucky that I have a partner who will let me become somebody I've never been before. And at the time, I remember just thinking, whoa, wait, what? I had to think about it. And then I was like, well, duh, think about it. If you're going to be with somebody for 5 years or 10 years or 50 years, you better damn well hope they're going to be like somebody that they've never been before. How stupid would that be? If your goal is, this is who you are when I met you, and 10 years later, I don't want you to have any new hobbies and any new interests. I don't want you to have any new subjects you want to talk about, or any new books you want to read, or movies that you want to watch. Like, it's absurd. And yet, we approach so many things in our life like that, whether it's institutions or organizations. And here's the deal that I've learned along the way, because along the way, I've worked with lots of different organizations, from the Foreign Affairs Department of Canada, part of an event with the United Nations. I did a project with UNESCO, War Child Canada, the Red Cross, lots of religious organizations, as you can imagine, over the years. Lots of arts organizations like Canada Council for the Arts and Factor and, Manitoba Film and Sound, lots of different agencies and organizations. And here's one of the things it took me a long time to realize what I'm trying to share with you. I believed that somehow I was missing out. Here I am over in my little corner of the world, brokering. I did not mean to have the career that I ended up having. It was a total accident, wasn't even the best fit, but it just fell into my lap and I was running with it. And then I was able to broker that into doing house concerts that were making me infinitely more money. If you play in Winnipeg, you're lucky if you're probably getting 2 beers per band member. I seem to remember that was like a standard sort of, here, you get 2 drinks each. That's what we're paying you. And by the way, bring out all of your friends, and we're going to delay you from getting on stage for an hour after we told you we're going to play, so that your friends will show up at 9:30 because they think you're going to play at 10, but we're not going to let you get on until 11:30 so that your friends sit there and drink for 2 hours. And for all of this effort and everything that you put into it, we'll give you 2 beers each. That seemed to be pretty standard. So here I was, I had this little career that was functioning, that was supporting me and my family, and we were able to live, and I had lots of freedom to do lots of other things. If I could do it over again, I would not, toss that little career into the trash can the way I did, because I recognize right now, man, if you have a way to pay the bills and to support yourself and live, man, whatever you need to do that. That's an honorable thing, to scratch together a career out of nothing, to make something out of nothing. That's creative. That's amazing. So I had convinced myself, though, my perception was I was missing out, or I didn't have this legit career because I wasn't playing in pubs and clubs. And when I went and did that, I realized that's miserable. And not only that, the audiences are no different. Of course, on some surface area, these people, swear more than these people, or at least they swear more of these people in public, or they drink more or less, or whatever. They have but really, people are people. You find people anywhere who are really energized and excited by what it is that you're creating, singing, painting, performing. Be thankful for that. That's a gift. That's amazing. And so here I was. I really failed to see what I had. And not only that, I convinced myself that the people in charge of these organizations like the Music Association or the Arts Councils or whatever knew more than me about what was best for me in my career. And they didn't. In fact, I have learned a lot of times the people in charge of these organizations, they could be arts organizations or education organizations. You would think, well, these are the smartest, brightest, most innovative and creative minds that are in charge. Clearly, that's why they would have risen to the top, right? Often, if you have any experience at all, you realize, no, these are like the managers. They're great at managing systems. They're great at managing behavior. They're great at managing book sheets, the ledgers and whatever, but they're not the innovative, creative thinkers. Lots of times they're the managers who have risen because they are ideally suited for managing the systems and the organizations of a bygone era, of the status quo, of something that worked maybe 5-10 years ago. That's one of the things that blew my mind about being in the cultural arts and cultural industry. Artists are constantly innovating. Creativity leads to innovation. And so if you're in a creative industry, there's just by nature going to be innovation all around you. You just have that kind of energy. And I remember, I went to apply for a grant, a recording grant. And this is at the point, man, people are downloading music, they're streaming music. And I remember on the application, it was like, how many CDs have you sold, in the last whatever, how many tapes have you sold? It was some really outdated metric. It was like, how many music stores is your music being distributed by? And it's like, this was at a time like Sam the Record Man shut down, A&B Sound shut down, Blockbusters were shutting down. And here in the grant applications for the arts organizations who you would think would have their finger on the pulse of innovation and creativity and where we're going, they were still using metrics for qualitating success on a 10 or 20-year-old model, which no longer even existed. So that to me is such an important thing. We can set ourselves up for failure if we believe that the people in charge of the way that things used to be done or have always been done this way are the ones who hold the keys to opening the kingdom, the gates to the great beyond and all that we hope to achieve and experience in this life. They're not, we absolutely have to stop looking for formulas and these equations. They're going to lead us, logically to some conclusion because it worked that way for somebody else. You and I, whatever you happen to be doing, I say this all the time when I'm in schools, you just need to figure out how it works for you. If you're a teacher, or if you're an administrator in a school, or whatever your situation happens to be, you don't need to figure out how this particular thing works for the class across the hall or the people upstairs or downstairs. What works for you and what's going to work for you is going to be tapping into your unique gifts, the talents that you have developed over the years, the experiences that you've had. You have a specific way of looking at the world, at your problems. And we are most successful when we trust ourselves. And yeah, you need a safe and supportive environment to do that. I remember, this was a number of years ago, I was doing a Pro D session for high school teachers, and we were talking about slam poetry. And it was pretty evenly split in the room. Some of the teachers were just like, this sounds fantastic. Like, a couple of them said, poetry is my least favorite unit that I have to teach. This really gets me excited. We had written and performed in this Pro D session so that the teachers, I just said, let's do exactly the first lesson that I do with classes, no matter how old they are. Let's just do it here together, and we'll walk through the process and discuss it. So they had done it. They really had a handle on it. And a couple of them are just like, you know what? I'm excited. Now I'm excited for the poetry unit because I'm going to incorporate this, and I think it's going to be an absolute game changer. There were other teachers who were super resistant to it. And they were like, you know what? You get one chance. And I remember somebody saying, I don't got time to experiment with something that might not work, because then I'm going to get called in for my, evaluation. And if they haven't learned whatever the objectives are, or whatever the metric for, evaluating the success of teaching that unit, if it didn't work out, they were like going to have the consequence of getting a bad review. And for them, that risk was way too high, and they weren't going to do it. And you know what? I at the time, I was probably looking for a 100% buy-in. Right now, if I was to do that session over again, I'd be like, trust your gut. Trust your gut. If you guys are excited about doing it, there's something about what we've just done with slam poetry that is tying into your creative capital. It works for you, or you can see how it could work for you. But you over here, you went through the same, example. We did the same workshop. We workshopped it out. You tried it, and you are left with that feeling like, no, this isn't going to work for me. Trust that. There is no one size fits all, not for any of us. And I think that's more than ever what we need in this time of exponential change in industries, with all of us as individuals, with whether it's COVID or anything else in the last couple of years that we've been trying to deal with and manage, different ways of working, whether it's remotely, whether it's with different technology that we never did. Some people have really risen up. The most unexpected people. I'm not sure if we were to talk, you would have stories like this too. I'm meeting some people, man, they're in their like 60s, 70s. You would think, a lot of people are like, oh, I can't even figure out how to use the remote on my TV. I'm an old dog. You can't teach me any new tricks. You'd expect that kind of, perspective from somebody in their 60s or 70s, and some of them are, but some of them are like, you know what? I figured out how to use Zoom. I figured out how to use, get my backdrop. I got this fancy backdrop, and they're, creating slides for their presentations, and they're super excited because they're learning, but more than anything else, they're tapping into their creative capital, their potential. And if you and I can do that, man, it's the difference between hope and optimism. Hope really grounds us in our own potential and in the what we believe we are capable of doing and being and becoming. Optimism, I feel, is a very outward focused thing. You're optimistic based on somebody else in charge, or somebody else doing something for you, somebody else solving your problems. And I think if you think back to meetings that you've been in the most frustrating meetings that you've been in so many times, doesn't it come down to one side of the room is really advocating for ideas and innovation that are coming out of the hope that they have for problem solving, that's based in their own creative capital and that of those that are around them. And the people who are really resistant to innovative change and ideas and experiments are the ones who are like, no, I don't want to be part of this. I want somebody else, the president of the organization, the head, the principal, or the superintendent, or the minister of education, we want someone else to solve our problems. And ultimately, I don't know if you've ever met anybody who that actually works for. So that was my story of my biggest failure. I never did that again. I realized that was terrible. That was a terrible experience. It didn't work for me. I realized horribly on that tour. I remember driving down the road from one crappy gig to the next, just sitting in silence going, I've never put together such a terrible tour. How did this happen? And it was a very honest moment with myself. And I was like, I can't keep doing this. I have to have the confidence in myself to know that if I'm doing something that I love and I'm good at, and it's positively impacting other people, and it's checking off those practical boxes as well. I need to be able to feed my family. I need to be able to pay my bills. I need to be able to, live life. But I'm always looking for something that's a bit more than that as well. And you know what? When not getting into it now, but my partner and I, we sold our house in Winnipeg, and we took a bunch of the money from the sale of that house. And we spent a year traveling around the world with our kids. And I'll tell you about that sometime. Wrote a book about it called 4 Homeless Millionaires, how one family found riches by leaving everything behind. But what happened was when I came back from that year off, I realized I am going to actually have to start right from scratch. The house concert circuit was flooded in many ways. There was tons of people doing it around 2011, 2012. The smaller venues in communities across Canada had all stopped promoting live original music. It was obviously a big cultural shift. Every promoter that I worked with, but one, was no longer in the industry, no longer working it. So when I came back from this year off, it wasn't like I need to work extra hard to get back on the circuit and get back into it. It didn't exist. And I ended up in schools because schools still existed, and I wasn't set up. This was what I do now and what I've done for the last 12 years. It was no more intentional at the outset than what happened to me in Kelowna or what happened to me in Winnipeg. I just followed my gut. And I do remember there was one school, a French immersion school I'd gone to a couple of years in a row, and I've been teaching slam poetry to the school. And they booked me for the 3rd year in a row. And it was a Thursday afternoon. On Monday, I was going to be starting, and I had to fly up to where this was. It was in northern Canada. And I phoned the principal on Thursday afternoon just to say, hey, I got my flight booked on Sunday. I'm going to be there. I got my car rented, so I'll be there Monday morning. Just want to make sure everything was good to go. We still want to do slam poetry? And the principal was like, oh, I don't know. What else do you do? Well, I do songwriting and I do, video projects and multimedia and whatever. And she thought about it for like 5 seconds and said, could you write a song and make a video that would involve all 360 students in the school? And I'm just like, I need to make rent, right? I'm just like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. I'll just bring all my stuff with me. I didn't think it through. I didn't have a plan or anything. And I remember it never even dawned on me. I wasn't even nervous because it didn't even dawn on me what I had just said that I would do. And I remember parking my car, grabbing my guitar and my bag of cameras and stuff, and walking up to the school on Monday morning. And then all of a sudden, all these kids were like passing me, going into the front doors. And all of a sudden, I was looking around going, wait, what did I say I was going to do? I'm writing a song this week with 360 students and I'm making a video. How am I doing that? Too late, right? Too late to worry about it. Just time to roll up the creative sleeves, so to speak, and get down to business, which is what I did. And that's what I've done for the last 12 years more than anything else, because, and I'll tell you all about it in another podcast, but that accidentally really opened up the door to play to every single gift and talent and ability and education and experience that I've ever had. I could tell you how much I charge, exactly how I do it. I could give you my business model entirely and you could never steal it. One person could never steal it because it is so uniquely tailored to me, because I am not teaching it to any other musician or artist or whatever. Nobody I know lots of songwriters, but they couldn't do what this project does. I know lots of motivational speakers, but they couldn't do what this project does. I know lots of coaches and consultants, but they couldn't do what this does, because this is really just played to me. And so whatever your thing is, whoever you are, play to your gifts. And don't have any expectation that what you need to do is going to figure it out for anybody else. I'm tracking down some of the most unique and interesting stories and people I can to interview for this podcast, because I have met farmers and I've met teachers, I've met photographers, I've met a lot of different people, business people, community developers, some politicians who approached their thing in such a creative way. It's super inspiring to me, whether I know anything about their industry or organization or not. So I'm glad you listened. Being creative, it's way more than a podcast for me. It's a mindset. It's a lifestyle, and one that produces an energy and empowers resilience. Resiliency and the confidence to face the challenges that life throws at me. That's what I want to share with you, because that creative mindset, it creates a momentum that takes us from one success or failure to the next, but it helps us gain confidence to face whatever's around the corner. So I hope you were inspired. I hope you were able to relate. Please don't hold my confession against me. I do that for myself. Feel free to leave a comment or ask a question. And remember, you are capable of infinitely more than you have ever given yourself credit for. So until next time.